Okay, so have you ever had that feeling where you're like, does my boss even like me?
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you're new to a company. It's like you're still trying to figure everything out and you just get this vibe like
Yeah.
something's off.
It's tough. It really is. I think starting a new job can be a lot like being the new kid in school again.
Oh boy.
And if you don't click with your boss, especially early on,
Right.
it can really make or break those early career experiences.
It's like you're already trying so hard to make a good first impression,
Yeah.
and then you're hit with this like, is it me?
Right.
Is it them? It's that feeling of, ugh, Mondays, but like every day.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's a situation a lot of people find themselves in. That feeling when it seems like your boss might have it out for you, especially as a newbie.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember is that it goes beyond just like hurt feelings. This can have a real impact
Well, for sure.
on someone's confidence,
Yeah,
especially when they're so new to the workforce and still figuring out their own professional identity.
absolutely. One source we looked at even called it a confidence killer,
Wow.
which is honestly a pretty accurate way to put it. You're already dealing with a new job, new people, new routine.
Yeah, you're trying to learn the ropes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The last thing you need is this constant worry that your boss just doesn't like you.
right. And it can be really isolating. And a lot of times it goes beyond just like a personality clash. There's actually this whole concept of cold treatment
Cold treatment. Okay.
in the workplace. Have you ever experienced that?
I think so. What does that look like?
Well, it's not always like outright hostility, but it's more of like this pattern of being excluded or passed over for things, almost as if you're invisible.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
It's like you're stuck in this weird work limbo.
Yes.
You're there, but you're not really there.
You're just kind of existing.
And it's so easy to internalize that and start doubting yourself,
Yes.
especially when you're still new and try to prove yourself.
Exactly.
So it's no wonder that some people think quitting might be the best way to go in these situations.
Right. They see it as self-preservation,
Mm.
Instead of toughing it out in a toxic environment, you prioritize yourself and find a better fit,
Yeah.
a company culture that actually lifts you up and helps you grow.
It's like choosing a spacious office with a view over a cramped, dark cubicle.
Exactly.
They're both workplaces.
But the environment can make all the difference for your well-being and how you do your job.
100%.
But I'm sure there's another side to this whole quitting thing.
Oh, yeah,
Because
absolutely.
there might be.
Just because it might be the right choice sometimes doesn't mean it always is. In fact, the research actually presented a pretty strong case for why you shouldn't just jump ship at the first sign of trouble.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the argument for sticking it out then? Even with a boss who's bringing you down.
So one of the main things they highlighted is that at the end of the day, your success at work really comes down to your performance,
Okay.
not whether or not your boss is sending you a birthday card.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the whole do they like me, do they not like me thing.
But at the end of the day, you're there to get the job done.
Exactly. And that actually brings up this idea of managing up. It came up quite a bit in the research you shared.
Managing up.
Okay.
That sounds interesting. And kind of scary at the same time. Like training your dragon, but your boss is the dragon.
Well, not exactly, but I like the way you think.
Okay, good.
So managing up is basically about being really strategic in how you work with your boss, understanding their style, their priorities,
Right.
and then figuring out how to align your work with what they're looking for.
So it's less about dodging fire and more about like learning their language.
Yeah. A perfect example is, let's say your boss is all about efficiency and seeing those concrete results.
Okay.
Instead of just giving them a long, rambling update, you could send a short weekly report
I see.
highlighting what you accomplished and how it connects back to their goals.
Oh, that makes sense.
So same work, but you're presenting it in a way that clicks with them.
Right. It's like you're subtly shifting their perspective without any weird mind games.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
just good communication.
Yeah.
And it's not just about reporting either. Managing up can also mean looking for ways to use your skills
see.
in a way that supports their vision. Say your boss is really into this new project,
Okay.
and you have some skills that could be helpful. Offering to help shows them what you're good at,
Right.
but it also shows that you get their priorities.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of communication strategy and a little intuition
Yeah.
to figure out the best way to work with them.
Yeah.
This managing up thing could be a game changer,
Totally.
not just for dealing with a tough boss, but for any job, really.
I think so. It's definitely a skill that will always be useful. And speaking of the long game, another argument against quitting too soon is the whole idea of persistence.
Right. Like Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to go through some tough times to really appreciate the good ones.
Exactly. Not every job is going to be perfect. Challenges are just part of life, and work is no different. Sticking with something, even when it's hard, even with a difficult boss, it can teach you a lot about resilience,
That's true.
problem solving, and how to handle different personalities.
And you never know what you might learn along the way.
For sure.
Sometimes those tough situations end up being the best learning experiences,
Yeah.
even if they don't feel like it at the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it all comes back to another thing the sources talked about: emotional intelligence versus making quick decisions.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the moment when you feel unappreciated or disliked, but you have to step back and look at the situation clearly.
So before you hit send on that resignation email,
Right.
take a breath and ask yourself, is this really worth it?
Exactly. Is it something you can try to fix with managing up? Is there potential for growth even with the challenges?
Right.
Or are you really unhappy and need to get out?
It's about knowing when to persevere and knowing when to move on.
Absolutely. And that actually leads to a really important point that the research made. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about what's right for you,
I like that.
based on your values, your goals, and how you see the situation.
So with all that said, how do you actually start figuring that out? It's easy to say, just do what feels right.
Right.
But when you're dealing with a frustrating situation, it's hard to even know what right is for you.
Yeah, it definitely takes some work. And I think it starts by asking yourself some tough questions.
Okay.
Luckily, the research had some good ones.
Hit me with those thought-provoking questions then.
Yeah.
What are we thinking about today?
Okay, so first one. What are your non-negotiables when it comes to work? Like, what are those things you absolutely need in a job
Right.
to feel good about it, both professionally and personally?
I love that. It's
Yeah.
like figuring out your deal breakers. What are those things you're not willing to budge on?
Exactly. And those are going to be different for everyone. For some people, it might be having a team that works together,
Right.
where they feel supported. For others, maybe it's knowing they have room to grow in their career.
I see.
Or maybe it's having some freedom and flexibility in how they work.
It's about knowing what you need to do your best work. And once you know those non-negotiables,
Yeah.
you can look at your situation and be like, okay, is this working for me?
Exactly. You can ask yourself, are those needs being met right now?
Right.
Or is there even a chance they could be met in the future? And if the answer is no, then it might be time to look for something else.
That makes sense.
But even before you make a decision, there's another question to think about.
Okay, shoot. What's the next question on our list?
So it's this: can you do anything to try and make things better before you quit?
So it's like before you just walk out, try to fix things if you can.
Exactly. We talked about managing up earlier. Are there ways you can communicate better?
Right.
Can you show off what you're accomplishing more? Maybe there are other people at the company you could learn from.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's about taking charge of your own situation
Yes.
and focusing on what you can control, even when it feels like everything's a mess.
Exactly. And then finally, even if you're thinking about leaving,
Yeah.
it's good to ask yourself one more thing.
Okay, what's that last question?
It's this: is there still something to learn from this job? Okay.
Even with all the challenges.
That's a good one,
Yeah.
because it makes you look past all the frustration and think about the bigger picture.
Exactly. Are you learning good skills?
Mm.
Are there parts of your job that you actually like? Maybe you can learn from other people at the company, even if your boss isn't the best.
It's like looking for those little bright spots that make the tough days a little easier.
Yes.
Wow, this has been so helpful. I feel like we covered so much,
Me too.
from how hard it can be to deal with a difficult boss to what you can actually do about it.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation with no easy answers, but hopefully this gives you some ideas for figuring out what to do.
For sure. But before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom?
If I had to give one last piece of advice, it would be to do your research about the company itself.
Well, that's smart.
It's one thing to look them up before you start working there, but it's another to really see what it's like to actually work there every day.
Yeah, like what's the company culture really like? Exactly. Check out websites like Glassdoor where people share their experiences. But remember to take those with a grain of salt.
Of course.
See if the company has things like mentorship programs or leadership training, or if they have a reputation for promoting from within.
That's a good point. Those things can tell you a lot about how much a company values its employees.
Exactly.
So basically arm yourself with information
Yes.
so you can make a good choice for you. Whether you decide to stay or go, it's about feeling good about that decision.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's a great note to end on. Until next time.